The 312th Omega had just curtsied and stepped back from the dais when King Soren Valdane lifted one hand from the armrest of his throne and said, in a voice emptied of all patience, "No." A murmur rippled through the great hall. 312. 3 days of this. 3 days of Omegas walking single file toward a king who could not see them, offering their wrists, their throats, the vulnerable pulse points where scent gathered strongest, and 312 times that same flat syllable had dropped from his mouth like a stone into still water. No. 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 The court had stopped whispering about it by the second day. By the third, they had stopped pretending not to stare. The selection was failing. Everyone knew it. Soren sat motionless on the iron throne, his head tilted slightly to the right the way it always was now, angled towards sound rather than sight. His eyes were open but fixed on nothing, pale gray irises clouded at the edges where the curse had eaten through. He was still terrifyingly large, broad across the shoulders and built like something designed to break other things, but there was a stillness to him now that hadn't been there before. A containment. Like a wolf locked inside a body it could no longer fully command. His beta, Tavan, stood 2 steps below the throne, his expression carefully neutral, though the tightness around his jaw betrayed the strain. 3 days. 312 Omegas drawn from every noble house, every allied territory, every bloodline of significance in the realm, and the king's wolf had rejected every single one. Tavan leaned toward the throne and spoke low enough that only Soren could hear. "There are 16 remaining, Your Majesty. After that, the selection pool is exhausted." Soren said nothing. His fingers curled around the armrest, knuckles whitening briefly, then releasing. He didn't nod. He didn't acknowledge the words at all. The next Omega approached. A tall, auburn-haired woman from the Eastern Territories. She walked with practiced grace, chin high, and extended her wrist with the confidence of someone who had been told her entire life she was exceptional. Soren inhaled once. No. The woman's composure cracked. Just barely. A flicker of shock. Then fury. Then nothing. She turned and walked away. The court watched her go. And that was when Elowen passed through the hall. She wasn't supposed to be there. She had no business anywhere near the selection ceremony, and she knew it. But the head gardener had sent her with fresh moonflower cuttings for the evening banquet arrangements, and the service corridor that ran behind the great hall was flooded from a burst pipe, and the only other route meant crossing through the back of the room during a gap between candidates. She moved quickly, her head down, a wooden tray of pale white blooms balanced against her hip. The moonflowers were at peak fragrance, their petals still damp from the night's dew, releasing that distinct sweetness into the air around her. She'd worked with them so long she couldn't smell it on herself anymore, but others could. Others always could. She was halfway across the back of the hall, hidden behind the standing rows of courtiers, when the king went rigid. It was sudden. Violent, almost. His entire body locked, his spine straightening, his head snapping to the left with an alertness that hadn't been there for any of the 312 Omegas who had stood directly in front of him. His nostrils flared, his lips parted. The hall noticed. Conversations died mid-word. Heads turned, first toward the king, then following the direction of his attention toward the back of the room. Toward the narrow gap between the last row of courtiers where a young woman in a dirt-stained apron was trying very hard to become invisible. "Stop," Soren said. The word cut through the silence like a blade. Elowen froze, the tray trembling in her hands, moonflower petals scattering across the stone floor. That scent. His voice had changed. Something raw had cracked through the surface, something almost desperate. He was gripping both armrests now, leaning forward on the throne. "Bring her to me." 2 guards moved instantly, Before Eowyn could process what was happening, hands closed around her arms and she was being guided forward, through the crowd, past hundreds of faces turning to stare, past Omegas in silk gowns watching a girl in gardening clothes being marched toward their king. She was brought to the base of the dais. The tray was taken from her shaking hands. Someone brushed the fallen petals from her sleeve. And then there was silence. Absolute silence, as 300 courtiers watched the blind Alpha King rise from his throne and descend the steps toward her. He moved with frightening precision for a man who couldn't see, each step deliberate, guided by sound, by spatial memory, by the sheer gravitational pull of whatever had seized his wolf. He stopped a foot away from her, close enough that she could see the damage the curse had done to his eyes, the way the gray had gone milky and pale, beautiful and ruined at the same time. He reached for her. His hand found the side of her neck first, fingertips grazing her pulse point, then sliding upward to her jaw. His palm settled against her cheek, and he inhaled so deeply his chest expanded with it, his entire body leaning into the breath like a drowning man breaking the surface. A sound escaped him. Low, involuntary, wrecked. "Where have you been?" he whispered. Eowyn couldn't speak, couldn't move, couldn't do anything except stand there with the king's hand on her face while her heart tried to break through her ribs, because she remembered exactly where she had been. She remembered the last time she'd stood before this man, 6 months ago, when his eyes still worked, and he had looked at her for less than 3 seconds before that single, devastating word. Next. She remembered the walk back through the hall afterward, the longest walk of her life, past the pitying glances and the whispered confirmation of what everyone already knew, that a nameless gardener with dirt under her fingernails was never going to be chosen by a king. She had not cried. She had waited until she reached the Moonflower Gardens, until she was alone among the blossoms that only opened in the dark. And then she had let herself break. And now he was touching her like she was sacred, like she was the answer to something. And she wanted to scream. "Your Majesty," Tavan said carefully from somewhere behind them. "That is Eowyn Ashwick, the Moonflower Tender. You dismissed her in the first selection." Soren's hand did not move from her face. His jaw tightened. The muscle beneath the skin jumped once, twice. "I know who she is," he said. And something in his voice made the entire room go cold. 6 months earlier, Eowyn had stood in this same hall wearing a borrowed dress that didn't quite fit. It had belonged to one of the laundry maids, a woman 2 inches taller and considerably wider through the hips. Eowyn had pinned the waist and hemmed the skirt by candlelight the night before, her stitches uneven in her haste, and still the fabric hung wrong. She'd known it the moment she stepped into line. Every other Omega in the selection wore silk, satin, something that caught the light. Eowyn wore a dead woman's dress held together with crooked seams and quiet desperation. She was only there because the law required it. Every unmated Omega within palace grounds had to be presented during a formal selection. It didn't matter that she was a gardener. It didn't matter that her bloodline was unknown, that she'd been raised by Marath, the head healer, after being found on the temple steps as an infant wrapped in moonflower vines. The law was the law. There were 40 Omegas that day, the first round. Daughters of lords, sisters of generals, women who had been groomed for this moment since birth. Eowyn was number 37. By the time her turn came, King Soren had already chosen 4 for the second round, and the court was buzzing with speculation about which one he would select as his mate. Eowyn stepped forward. Her palms were damp. The borrowed dress pulled at the pins. Soren sat on the throne, his gray eyes sharp and clear and devastatingly focused. He was younger than she had expected, though everything about him radiated authority. The kind of man who made a room feel smaller just by existing in it. His gaze swept over her from head to hem. She felt the assessment like a physical thing, clinical and complete, measuring and finding insufficient. She watched his eyes pause on the uneven hem, on the too wide waist, on her hands, which she had scrubbed raw but which still carried the ghost of soil beneath the nails. She watched him see everything she was, everything she wasn't, and arrive at his conclusion in the space between one heartbeat and the next. Next. One word. He was already looking past her, his attention shifting to the Omega behind her, before Elowen had fully registered the dismissal. She stood there for one terrible, suspended second, the word lodging somewhere beneath her sternum like a splinter, and then a handler touched her elbow and guided her away. She passed the remaining Omegas on her walk back, past the courtiers who had already forgotten her, past Tavan, who didn't even glance in her direction. She made it through the great hall, down the corridor, through the servants' passage, across the courtyard, and into the moonflower gardens before her legs gave out. She sat among the closed blossoms, their petals furled tight against the afternoon sun, and pressed her forehead to her knees. She didn't cry immediately. The tears came slowly, reluctantly, leaking out sideways like they were ashamed of themselves. The moonflowers opened at dusk. She was still sitting there when they did, their white petals unfurling one by one in the fading light, releasing that sweet, heavy fragrance that had been the only constant in her life. She had tended these gardens since she was old enough to hold a trowel. While other children played, she had learned which soil the moonflowers preferred, which phase of the moon made them bloom brightest, how to coax a dying vine back to life with patience and steady hands. The flowers didn't care about her bloodline. They didn't care about her borrowed dress or her dirty nails. They bloomed for her anyway. She requested the permanent night shift the following morning. The head gardener, a gruff man named Aldrich, who had never asked a personal question in his life, looked at her for a long moment, then nodded without comment. After that, Elowen worked only after dark, tending the moonflower beds by lantern light, sleeping through the days when the rest of the palace was awake. She became nocturnal, invisible. She moved through the palace like a ghost, and slowly, carefully, she stitched the wound closed and tried to forget. Then the assassination happened. 2 months before the current selection, a delegation from the northern clans arrived under a banner of truce. They brought gifts, wine, rare pelts. They also brought 3 men with cursed blades hidden in their coats. The attack came during a private dinner. The king killed 2 of the assassins himself. The third got close enough to draw blood, a slash across his face laced with something that burned through flesh and kept burning. He lost his sight within hours. It went in stages, the edges first, then the color, then the shapes, then the light. By morning, the king of Ashenmoor was blind, the court shattered, factions formed overnight, allies became uncertain, enemies became bold. And through it all, Soren sat in the dark of his chambers and refused to see anyone. The healers tried everything. Mirith herself spent 3 sleepless nights mixing tinctures, pressing poultice after poultice against the king's ruined eyes. Nothing worked. Whatever had been on those blades was not ordinary poison. The new selection was announced a month later. The king needed a mate. Not for comfort, not for companionship, but because an unmated blind alpha was a vulnerability the kingdom could not afford. A bonded mate would anchor his wolf, stabilize his authority, give the court something to rally around. But this time, the selection would be conducted by scent. The king could no longer see his candidates. He would choose by what his wolf recognized. 312 Omegas were summoned from across the realm. Their names were entered into the registry. Beside Elowen's name, someone had written in small, efficient script, "Previously dismissed, excluded from current selection by order of the Master of Ceremonies." She hadn't argued, hadn't even considered it. Why would she? He'd already looked at her and found nothing worth keeping. What difference would it make if he couldn't see her at all? Except now she was standing at the base of his throne with his hand on her face, and his wolf keening behind his ribs. And the difference, it turned out, was everything. "Take her to the East Wing," Soren said, his voice rough, his hand still cupping her jaw like he was afraid she would dissolve if he let go. "My private quarters. She stays within the king's wing until further notice." Elowin's mouth opened. Nothing came out. A guard stepped forward. Tavin was watching her with an expression she couldn't read, something between calculation and wonder. "Your Majesty," she managed, and her voice sounded very far away. "I'm a gardener." "You were," Soren said. His hand finally dropped from her face, and the absence of his touch hit her like a physical blow. She felt it in her chest, a hollow ache, sudden and sharp, that made no sense at all. The guard took her arm. The crowd parted. And as Elowin was led from the great hall, she caught a glimpse of the 312 Omegas watching her go, their faces a mosaic of disbelief. She was nobody. She had always been nobody. And the most powerful man in the kingdom had just claimed her in front of everyone. She had absolutely no idea why. The East Wing smelled like cedar and cold stone. Elowin's quarters were a small room adjoining the king's chambers, connected by a single door that she was informed, by a very stern-faced attendant, was to remain unlocked at all times. "His Majesty's orders," the attendant said, placing fresh linens on the narrow bed. "You are to be accessible." "Accessible," Elowin repeated flatly, "like a supply closet." The attendant gave her a look that suggested supply closets did not typically argue with the king's household arrangements, and left. Elowin sat on the edge of the bed and stared at the unlocked door. She pressed her hands between her knees to stop them shaking. 6 hours ago, she'd been elbow-deep in compost. Now she was sitting in the king's private wing, still wearing the same dirt-stained apron. The summons came an hour later. Tavan appeared in her doorway, his posture as composed as ever. "The king requests your presence," he said. "Requests or commands?" Elowin asked. Something flickered in Tavan's expression. The distinction, in this case, is academic. The king's chambers were enormous. Tall windows lined one wall, bookshelves climbed to the ceiling, and a fire burned low in a stone hearth wide enough to stand in. Soren was standing by the window, his back to the room, his face turned toward the glass like he could still see what lay beyond it. He didn't turn when she entered. His hands were clasped behind his back, his shoulders rigid beneath the dark fabric of his shirt. "You tend the moonflower gardens," he said. "Not a question." "Yes, Your Majesty." "For how long?" "Since I was 7. Elowin stayed near the door, her fingers twisted in the hem of her apron. "Mirath, the head healer. She raised me. The gardens were adjacent to the infirmary. I started helping and never stopped." He was quiet for a moment. When he spoke again, his voice was lower. "Your scent. It carries the moonflower. Deeply. Not on the surface like perfume. Deeper than that. It's in your skin." Elowin swallowed. 17 years of handling them every night. Mirath says the oils absorb over time, embed themselves. He turned then, and even though she knew he couldn't see her, the directness of his gaze was unnerving. His clouded eyes found her location with uncanny accuracy, tracking by sound, by the displacement of air, by some instinct that didn't require sight. "The selection will conclude," he said. "You'll remain here during the transition. My wolf has been—" He stopped. His jaw worked like the next word was something he had to force past his teeth. "Unsettled. Since the attack. Your presence settles it." "So, I'm a sedative," Elowin said. "You're a necessity," he corrected, and there was an edge to it, a rawness that startled her. "My wolf hasn't been calm in 2 months. Not once. Not for a single moment. And then you walked through that hall and everything went quiet." The words hung between them. Elowin didn't know what to do with them. I didn't walk through that hall for you, she said, more sharply than she intended. I was delivering flowers. I wasn't a candidate. I was explicitly removed from the selection because you already rejected me. The silence that followed was brutal. Soren's expression didn't change, but something behind it shifted. A fracture, hairline thin, running through the controlled surface. I know, he said quietly. Ilawan waited for more. An apology, an explanation, something. None came. The fire crackled. Somewhere in the corridor, a clock chimed the hour. Your Majesty, I don't understand what you want from me, she said. I want you to stay, he replied simply. That's all. She stayed. Not because she wanted to, she told herself, but because refusing a king's direct request, even one delivered softly, was not a luxury available to a gardener with no family and no name. The first days were strained and strange. She saw Soren mostly in passing. He kept to a rigid schedule, meetings and reports that stretched from dawn to well past dark, and she heard the strain of it through the walls. His voice, always controlled in public, growing rougher by evening. But she noticed things. He never ate a full meal. His hands trembled when he thought no one was watching. The attendants changed his bandages every morning, and each time they did, his breathing went shallow and controlled, in a way that spoke of pain he refused to name. And he didn't sleep. She knew this because she didn't sleep either, because the moonflower hours were her hours, and the walls between their rooms were not thick enough. She heard him at 2 in the morning, pacing. At 3, the scratch of a pen he could no longer see to guide. At 4, the creak of his chair as he sat by the dead fire and waited for a dawn he would never watch arrive. One night she heard a low, agonized groan from his room, bitten off quickly, followed by the thud of something hitting the floor. Then ragged breathing, the sound of a man trying very hard not to make any more noise. She knocked on the connecting door. Your Majesty? The sound stopped. I'm fine. You don't sound fine. Then perhaps you should stop listening. She pressed her forehead against the door. Your hands were shaking at dinner. You haven't slept in days. And just now, something knocked you off your feet. Silence. Then, so quietly she almost missed it. Go to bed, Ilawan. She went, but sleep didn't come. The next morning she found Mirath. The old healer was in the infirmary, grinding dried valerian with practiced efficiency. Ilawan closed the door behind her. The king's blindness, she said without preamble. It's not stable, is it? His tremors are getting worse. He's losing his balance. Last night he collapsed. I heard it. Mirath set down the pestle and wiped her hands on her apron. It's not poison, child, she said finally. I've tested his blood 6 times. What's in him doesn't behave like any toxin in my records. Then what is it? A curse, Mirath said. Old magic, the kind that doesn't just wound, it feeds. It took his sight first because that was the easiest thing to take. But it's still moving. His hearing has diminished by nearly 1/3. His sense of smell is weakening. And his wolf. She stopped. Her expression tightened into something Ilawan had never seen on the old healer's face before. Fear. His wolf is dying, Ilawan. The curse is severing the bond between man and beast, one thread at a time. And when the last thread breaks, when the wolf dies inside him, she didn't finish. She didn't need to. Every shifter knew what happened when the wolf died. The man followed. Always. Without exception. Ilawan felt the room tilt beneath her. How long? She whispered. Months, Mirath said. Maybe less. The word landed like a fist. Ilawan gripped the edge of the table and tried to breathe through the sudden, irrational surge of panic that flooded her chest. This shouldn't matter this much. He was the king who had dismissed her with a glance. She was a gardener sleeping in his spare room because her scent was convenient, but her hands were shaking, and her wolf, quiet and small and dormant her entire life, was pressing against the inside of her ribs with a desperation she had never felt before. "Does he know?" Elowyn asked. Mirath's silence was answer enough. He knew she was there before she knocked. It became a pattern over the following days, one neither of them acknowledged openly. Elowyn would arrive at his chambers in the evening carrying a pot of moonflower cuttings and a stack of reports Tavan had left for the king's review. She would set the flowers on the windowsill where the night air could coax them open, settle into the chair by the fire, and begin to read. The first night, Soren had resisted. "I don't need someone to read to me." "Tavan says you have 43 unsigned trade agreements and a grain dispute with the Southern Territories that's been festering for 2 weeks. Elowyn replied, already opening the first folder. "Your pride can survive an hour of my voice." He had gone very still. Then, almost imperceptibly, the corner of his mouth had twitched. She read to him every evening after that. It was an odd kind of intimacy. She sat close enough that the moonflower scent would reach him, close enough that she could see the tension bleed from his shoulders as the fragrance settled over the room. He listened with fierce concentration, asking sharp questions about tariff calculations and border patrol rotations that reminded her, forcefully, that beneath the blindness and the curse, this was still a man who held an entire kingdom in his hands. But the questions changed as the nights wore on, not always about policy. Sometimes, in the pause between one document and the next, he would ask other things. "The moonflowers, why do they only bloom at night?" "They're heliophobic," Elowyn said, reaching for the next report. "Sunlight triggers a chemical response that locks the petals shut. They need darkness to open. So they hide from the light." "They don't hide," Elowyn corrected gently. "They just need different conditions to bloom. There's a difference." Soren was quiet after that. When she glanced up, his expression had gone soft in a way she hadn't seen before. He caught himself quickly, clearing his throat and asking about the grain dispute, but the moment lingered. Small things accumulated. She noticed he always angled his chair toward hers, tracking her location by sound like a compass finding north. She noticed the fire was always built up before she arrived, the room always warm. One evening, she found a second chair had appeared beside the hearth, lower and more comfortable than the stiff-backed seat she'd been using. Neither of them mentioned it. "This chair is suspiciously comfortable," she said, sinking into it. "It was surplus," Soren said from across the room, not looking in her direction. "Surplus? From where? The royal collection of chairs no one asked for? Are you going to interrogate the furniture or read the supply reports?" Elowyn smiled. He couldn't see it, but something in the quality of the silence must have given her away, because his ears went faintly pink. She was falling into something. She knew it the way you know a current has you before you've been swept away. Too late to swim against it, too early to know where it ends. She tried to stop. Reminded herself of the borrowed dress, the single word, the walk back through the hall that had lasted forever. But memory is a poor shield against proximity, and Soren was not the man she had built in her mind during those months of exile. He was harder, sadder, funnier than she had expected, and far, far more broken. Mirath confirmed what Elowyn had been suspecting during their next meeting. The old healer's workshop smelled of dried herbs and burning sage, and her face carried the weight of someone about to say something she'd been carrying for too long. "The moonflower isn't just a scent to him," Mirath said, spreading a series of old texts across her workbench. The pages were brittle, the ink faded to the color of old rust. "There are records, ancient ones, from before the unification. The moonflower was once called the bond-keeper's bloom. It was cultivated specifically in temples dedicated to the moon goddess, Selvain, who governed the mating bonds between wolves." Elowyn's breath hitched. "What are you saying?" "The moonflower's chemical signature mirrors the pheromonal marker of a true mate bond," Mirath continued, her finger tracing a passage in the crumbling text. In extremely rare cases, a wolf who has been exposed to moonflower oils for years, deeply enough that the compound has bonded to their cellular structure, produces a scent that is indistinguishable from a fated mate's recognition marker. "So my scent isn't calming his wolf because it's pleasant," Elowen said slowly, the realization settling over her like cold water. "It's calming his wolf because his wolf thinks I'm his mate," Mirath finished. "Whether you actually are, or whether 17 years of moonflower saturation has simply created a perfect chemical imitation, I cannot tell you. But his wolf cannot tell the difference. And at this point, it may not matter." "Why wouldn't it matter?" "Because the curse is fighting it." Mirath's voice dropped. "Whatever magic is devouring his wolf, it's accelerating. The bond, real or constructed, is the only thing slowing the decay. Your proximity gives his wolf something to anchor to, something to fight for. Without you near him, the curse consumes faster." Elowen sat in stunned silence. She thought about the chair he'd placed by the fire, the reports he didn't need her to read, but let her read anyway, the way his wolf went quiet when she was close. She thought about her own wolf, pressing against her ribs every evening as she approached his door. The ache when she left. The dreams she'd started having. Formless and strange, full of dark forests and the sound of chains. "There's something else," Elowen said. "Something I haven't told you." Mirath waited. "When I touch him, sometimes I see things. Flashes. A dark place. Like a forest, but wrong. Dead trees. And something in the center. Something chained." Mirath's face went white. "His wolf," the old healer breathed. "You're seeing the curse from the inside." She didn't mean to fall asleep in his chambers. It happened the way most dangerous things happen, gradually and then all at once. They'd been working late, Soren dictating responses to border dispatches, while Elowen transcribed them in her careful, unpolished script. His handwriting had always been precise, Taven told her, disciplined strokes that reflected the man. Now the pen sat unused on his desk, and Elowen's looping letters filled the margins instead. "Your spelling is atrocious," Soren observed from his chair by the window, his head tilted at that listening angle. "I'm a gardener, not a scribe." "Clearly. Would you like to write them yourself, Your Majesty?" The silence that followed was just a beat too long. Elowen's stomach dropped. "I'm sorry," she said quickly. "That was thoughtless. I didn't mean—" "You meant exactly what you said," Soren interrupted. And there was no anger in his voice, only something tired and almost amused. "And you're the only person in this palace who still says what they mean to me. Everyone else speaks to me like I'm made of glass. Don't start now." Elowen swallowed hard and looked down at her hands, at the ink stains on her fingers, at the faint shimmer of moonflower oil that never fully washed away. "Your spelling is still atrocious, though," he added. She threw a wadded piece of parchment at him. It hit him square in the chest, and the look of utter surprise on his face, the half-second of bewildered silence before his mouth curved into the first real smile she'd ever seen from him, was worth every consequence that might follow. "Did you just—" he started. "Surplus parchment," she said innocently. "It was just lying around." The smile widened. She stared at it, transfixed. Something warm and terrible expanding in her chest. They worked until the candles guttered. Elowen didn't remember closing her eyes. One moment she was transcribing a note about the Eastern Watchtower rotations, and the next, she was waking in the armchair with a blanket draped over her that hadn't been there before. The fire had burned to embers. The room was washed in deep amber and shadow. And from beyond the half-open door to Soren's bedchamber, she heard a sound that made her blood freeze. Not a groan. Not a shout. Something worse. A low, sustained sound of agony that came from somewhere deeper than the throat, somewhere beneath the human register, like the cry of an animal being slowly torn apart. Elowen was on her feet before the thought fully formed. She crossed the room, pushed the door open, and found the king tangled in his sheets, his body rigid, his face contorted into an expression of such raw suffering that she felt it in her own chest like a physical blow. His hands were clawing at the mattress. His breathing came in ragged, wet gasps, and beneath his skin she could see something moving, a dark discoloration that pulsed along his veins like ink spreading through water. Soren. She said his name without thinking, without title, without formality. She grabbed his shoulder. The moment her skin made contact with his, the world split open. She wasn't in his chambers anymore. She was standing in a forest of black trees. The trunks were smooth as bone, their branches tangled overhead into a canopy that blocked whatever passed for sky. The ground was soft and yielding, like moss decaying for centuries. The air tasted of iron and rot, and the silence. It pressed against her ears, her skin, a presence rather than an absence, something actively consuming sound. Alawan walked forward because standing still felt like surrender. The forest stretched in every direction, identical, disorienting, designed to make her lose her way. But she followed the pull in her chest, the thread of something warm beneath the cold, and it led her to a clearing. The wolf was enormous. It lay on its side in the center of the clearing, its silver-white fur matted and dull, its ribs visible through the thinning coat. Chains of black iron wrapped around its body, each link pulsing with a sickly light that drained the creature with every heartbeat. This was Soren's wolf, the beast that had once commanded armies, that had made grown alphas lower their eyes. Now it lay dying in chains in a prison built from its master's stolen senses. "Oh," Elowen whispered, tears blurring her vision. "Oh no." She moved toward the wolf, her hand outstretched. The chains hummed when she got close, a warning vibration that resonated in her teeth. One of the links flared with dark light, and a wave of cold hit her so hard she staggered backward. The wolf's eye opened. Just one. A pale gray iris, so like Soren's that her breath caught. It focused on her with an intelligence that was unmistakably aware, unmistakably desperate. It knew her. She could feel it. Through the cold and the rot and the suffocating silence, the wolf recognized her. Its tail moved, just once, a weak thump against the dead ground. The chains tightened in response, the dark light flaring brighter, and the wolf's eyes squeezed shut in pain. "I'll come back," Elowen said fiercely, even as the forest began to dissolve around her. "Do you hear me? I'll come back for you." She was ripped out of the vision like a page torn from a book. She gasped, lurching backward, and found herself on the floor of Soren's bedchamber, her hand still on his shoulder. He was sitting upright now, breathing hard, his clouded eyes wide and unfocused. "What did you see?" he demanded, his voice raw, his hand closing around her wrist with bruising force. "You were there. I felt you. What did you see?" Elowen stared at him, shaking, tears still wet on her face. "Your wolf," she whispered. "Soren, your wolf is in chains." His grip on her wrist went slack. The color drained from his face, and for the first time since she'd known him, he looked afraid. "You can't go back there," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "Promise me. That place will eat you alive." Elowen opened her mouth to answer, but the words died on her tongue, because she could still feel the wolf's gaze on her, still feel that single desperate thump of its tail, and she knew, with a certainty that settled into her bones like iron, that she was going back. That night, alone in her quarters, she dreamed of the black forest. The bone-white trees pressed close, the silence screamed, and deep in the darkness, something whispered her name. She woke with her heart pounding and looked down at her wrist. 4 black marks, like fingerprints burned into the skin, traced a path from her pulse point to the base of her palm. By morning they had faded, but the place where they'd been still burned. Alawan told him everything. The black forest, The chains, the dark energy pulsing through each iron link, the marks on her wrist, the whisper. She did not tell him about the wolf's eye opening, about the recognition in its gaze. Some things were too fragile to say out loud. When she finished, the silence stretched so long she thought he might not respond at all. "How long have you been able to enter the curse space?" His voice was flat, controlled, but she could see his hands shaking. "Twice. The first time was a flash. The second was last night." "And the marks on your wrist?" "Gone by morning." "Gone by morning this time." He stood abruptly and moved to the window. "You think they'll fade next time?" "I don't know. But your wolf is dying in that place, Soren. Whatever the curse built, it's a cage, and your wolf is chained inside it, and it's getting weaker every— I know what's happening to my wolf." The words came out sharp. He pressed his palms against the window frame, head bowed. "I can feel it. Every day, a little less. Like parts of myself going dark, one room at a time." His voice cracked. Eowyn rose from her chair. "Then let me help. If I can get back in, if I can break those chains." "No." He turned from the window and the expression on his face stopped her. Not anger, terror. "The curse recognized you. Something whispered your name, and you think it's going to let you walk in and dismantle it? I think it's better than watching you die." Soren flinched. "You have already lost too much because of me. I looked at you 6 months ago and threw you away like you were nothing. 3 seconds. His jaw clenched. "I don't get to ask you to save me. This isn't about what you deserve. Go back to the gardens, Eowyn." The words hit her like a closed door. She stared at him. "What?" "Go back to the gardens. Back to your moonflowers. Back to the night shifts where no one sees you." His throat worked, and she watched him swallow something that looked like it had edges. "The selection will resume. Tavan will arrange it. There are other omegas, other scents. We'll find another way." "There is no other way. You rejected 312. Then I'll reject 300 more." His voice rose, filling the room, bouncing off the stone walls. "I will not feed you to this curse. I have taken your dignity, your time, your peace. I will not take your life. You're not taking anything. I'm offering. And I'm refusing." He turned away from her. She could see the tremor running through his shoulders, the way his hands had curled into fists so tight the knuckles had gone white. "Tavan will escort you back to your quarters in the lower palace. Your belongings will be sent down by evening." "Soren? That is an order, Miss Ashwick." Miss Ashwick, not Eowyn. The formality was deliberate. A wall thrown up between them in 3 syllables. She felt it like a blade between her ribs. She stood there watching his back, watching the rigid shoulders, the white-knuckled fists. He was shaking, and he was sending her away anyway. "Fine," she said, her voice thick. "But you should know something." He didn't turn. "Your wolf recognized me." She paused. "In that place, chained and dying, your wolf opened its eye and knew exactly who I was. It wagged its tail, Soren. Once. Like it was glad to see me." His shoulders hitched. A single sharp movement like something had broken inside his chest. Eowyn left before she could see the rest. The gardens felt like a grave. Eowyn returned to the moonflower beds that evening and tried to pretend the past 3 weeks hadn't happened. The moonflowers bloomed around her the way they always had, white petals opening in the dark. Except they didn't. Not like before. By the 4th night, a full quarter of the garden had gone dormant. The blossoms simply stayed closed, their petals locked tight, and the fragrance that had always filled her greenhouse was fading to a ghost of itself. She was fading with them. The headaches came first, building through the evenings until she was curled on the greenhouse floor. Then the nausea. Then the bone-deep exhaustion, like her body was running on a fuel source that had been cut off. Her wolf was inconsolable. The creature that had been quiet her entire life was howling inside her chest with a grief that made her eyes burn. It wanted him. It clawed toward him with every heartbeat, straining against the distance like a chain pulled taut. She caught fragments through the servant corridors. The king had cancelled all audiences. His tremors had worsened. He could no longer hear speech below a certain pitch, and the threshold was rising daily. On the 5th day, she saw him. She was crossing the upper courtyard at dusk when movement caught her eye. A figure emerged from the east wing, flanked by 2 guards. Soren. He was thinner, his clothes hanging differently. One hand on a guard's forearm for guidance, the other trembling at his side. His head was canted toward sound the way it always was now, but there was something desperate about it now, like he was straining to hear through a fog that grew thicker by the hour. He didn't sense her. 3 weeks ago, he would have caught her scent from across the courtyard. Now he walked past without a flicker of recognition, and the sound that escaped her throat was not a word. On the 7th day, Mireth came to the greenhouse. The old healer took in the dying moonflowers, the darkened beds, the girl sitting among them with shadows beneath her eyes. Her expression was grim. "He collapsed this morning," Mireth said without preamble. "Tavin caught him before he hit the floor. His hearing is nearly gone. His sense of touch is fading. The wolf has days, Elawan. Perhaps less." Elawan closed her eyes. "What you're feeling," Mireth continued, pulling the door shut behind her. "The sickness, the way your moonflowers are dying around you, that isn't coincidence. The bond has taken root. Your wolf and his wolf are connected now. Incompletely, but connected." "What does that mean?" Elowen asked, though she already knew. She could feel the answer in the hollow space behind her ribs, in the way her wolf was throwing itself against the walls of her chest. Mirath knelt beside her, took her hands, and held them firmly. "It means if you go back to him now, the curse may recognize the bond and follow it to you. It could consume you the way it's consuming him. You could lose your wolf. You could lose yourself." Elowen's breath stuttered. "And if I don't go back?" Mirath's grip tightened. "He dies," the old healer said quietly. "And because that bond has taken root, child, whether either of you chose it or not, you die with him." Elowen stood in the greenhouse among her dying flowers, Mirath's words still ringing in her ears, and made the easiest decision of her life. She didn't run. She walked. Through the greenhouse door, across the lower courtyard, up the servants' staircase, through corridors she had memorized during those weeks in the East Wing. She walked past startled attendants and confused guards, and one very alarmed chambermaid who called after her that the king's wing was restricted. She didn't stop. Tavan intercepted her at the final corridor. He stepped into her path, one hand raised, his expression the careful mask of a man accustomed to enforcing boundaries. "Miss Ashwick, the king has given explicit orders. His wolf has days," Elowen said, not slowing. "Possibly hours. You know this. I know this. And we both know I'm the only thing that's ever slowed the curse down." Taven's hand didn't drop, but something behind his eyes shifted. "He'll be furious," the beta said. "He'll be alive." For a long moment, Tavan studied her. Then he stepped aside. Elowen pushed through the doors to the king's chambers, and the smell hit her first. Something sour and medical layered over something darker. The curtains were drawn. The fire was dead. And Soren was in the chair by the window, not standing the way he used to, but slumped, like standing required more than he had left to give. He didn't react when the door opened, didn't turn his head. She realized with a sickening lurch that he hadn't heard her enter. His hearing was gone. She crossed the room, her footsteps silent on the thick carpet, and knelt in front of his chair. His eyes were closed. The dark circles beneath them had deepened into bruises. His hands lay limp in his lap, and the tremors were constant now, a fine vibration that ran through his fingers like something inside him was coming apart. Elowen reached up and placed her palms on either side of his face. His eyes flew open. The clouded gray irises moved without focus, searching for something they could no longer find, but the moment her skin touched his entire body shuddered. His nostrils flared, catching the moonflower scent that still clung to her despite everything, and a sound came out of him that she felt in her own chest. Not a word, not a groan. Something more fundamental than either. Recognition at the level of marrow and blood, and the place where the human ended and the wolf began. Elowyn. He said her name like a prayer he'd given up on. She leaned forward until her forehead rested against his. She could feel the curse pulsing beneath his skin, cold and wrong, but beneath it, faint and flickering, his wolf. Still there, still fighting. "I'm here," she said, knowing he couldn't hear the words but hoping he could feel them. His hands came up, shaking, and covered hers where they held his face. He pressed her palms harder against his jaw, greedy for the contact, and she felt his breath catch. "You need to go," he whispered. He couldn't hear his own voice. The words came out too loud, cracking at the edges. "The curse." "Will take me either way," she said against his skin. "If you die, I die with you. The bond won't let me survive it." Mirath confirmed it. She pulled back just enough to look at him, at the ruined gray of his eyes, at the face she had somehow learned to love in the space between one heartbeat and the next. "So I'm not here to save you, Soren. I'm here because there is nowhere else for me to be." His composure shattered. It didn't crack or fray. It broke apart all at once like a dam giving way, and what came through was grief so raw it made her eyes burn. His forehead dropped against her shoulder, his hands fisted in the back of her shirt, and he held on like the world was ending, which, for him, it was. "I should never have sent you away," he said into her neck, the words muffled and wrecked. "I should never have dismissed you. That day, in the selection, I looked at you for 3 seconds and I saw nothing, and it is the worst thing I have ever done. And I have done terrible things, Elowyn. I have led armies and made decisions that cost lives, but sending you away, both times, that is what I cannot forgive." "Then stop trying to forgive it," Elowyn said, threading her fingers through his hair. "And stop sending me away. Both would be helpful." He choked on something that might have been a laugh if it weren't drowning in grief. She kissed him. She pressed her mouth to his, and he responded immediately, his hands cradling her face, tilting her head the way he needed it. The kiss deepened into something that felt less like a choice, and more like gravity. Inevitable. Inescapable. She wrapped her arms around him, needing to be closer. His arms folded around her in return, and she could feel his heartbeat hammering against hers, could feel his wolf surging forward with desperate, clawing hope. "If we do this," he said against her mouth, his voice ragged, "the bond will seal, fully. Whatever happens in the curse space, you'll be tied to it. To me. There's no coming back from that." Elowyn pulled back and took his face in her hands. He couldn't see her expression. He couldn't hear the steadiness in her voice. So she pressed her answer into his skin instead, guiding his fingers to her lips so he could feel the shape of the words. "I choose you." He made a sound like something inside him had finally been allowed to breathe. The mating bite came like instinct and intention colliding at once. His mark found the curve of her neck, and the bond exploded through her like light through a prism, golden and searing and absolute. She marked him back, claiming him the way the moonflowers claimed the dark, completely and without apology, and felt the bond lock into place with a resonance that hummed through every fiber of her being. For a few minutes, there was only warmth. Only his arms around her, his heartbeat steady beneath her ear, the bond glowing between them like an ember that would never go cold. His wolf surged with renewed strength, and she felt it through the connection, felt the creature lift its head for the first time in months. Then the curse struck back. It hit like a fist of black ice through the center of the bond, exploiting the very connection that had given his wolf hope. Elowen gasped, her vision going dark at the edges, and felt the pull, violent and irresistible, dragging her consciousness down through layers of warmth and light and into the cold. The last thing she felt before the darkness swallowed her was Soren's arms tightening around her body. The last thing she heard was his voice, raw with terror, calling her name. Then the black forest closed over her like water. She was not alone. Soren stood beside her in the clearing of bone-white trees, and he was staring at her. Not past her, not through her, at her. His eyes were clear. The clouded gray was gone, replaced by something sharp and silver and luminous, like moonlight trapped in glass. In this place, inside the curse, his wolf's sight remained. The curse had stolen his physical vision, but here, in the realm it had built, the rules were different. He was seeing her for the first time. His gaze moved over her face with a slowness that made her chest ache, taking in every detail his hands had only hinted at, the color of her eyes, which he'd never known, the moonflower pollen that dusted her skin in faint, silvery patterns she'd never been able to fully wash away. "You're beautiful," he said, and the wonder in his voice nearly broke her. "We don't have time for that," Elowen managed, though her eyes were stinging. "I know." He didn't look away. "I needed to say it." The forest pressed in around them, darker and more hostile than her previous visits. The trees had multiplied, their branches knitting together overhead into a cage. And at the center of the clearing lay the wolf. It was worse than before. The chains had tightened, biting into flesh, and the wolf's breathing was shallow and labored, each exhale a small surrender. Soren dropped to his knees beside the creature. His hand hovered over its flank, trembling. "What did they do to you?" he whispered. The chains hummed in response, and as they brightened, Elowen saw what she hadn't seen before. Each link bore a face. Human faces, frozen in expressions of pain and accusation, pressed into the black iron like death masks. "Who are they?" she asked. Soren's hand closed into a fist above the wolf's body. "Before the assassination, there were border raids on northern settlements. I pulled the garrison south to reinforce the capital because intelligence suggested the assassins would strike from that direction." His jaw tightened. "I was right about the assassins. But the villages were left undefended. 47 people died." The faces writhed. A whisper rose from them, an accusation that didn't need language. The curse didn't create this guilt, Elowen realized. It found it. It found the wound you already carried and built a prison out of it. "I weighed 47 lives against the stability of the kingdom and chose the kingdom. And I would make the same decision again." His voice flattened. "That is the part I cannot live with." The chains pulsed brighter. The wolf whimpered, a broken animal sound. And the forest leaned closer, the bone trees bending inward, feeding on the guilt the way Mirath said the curse fed, growing stronger with every repetition of the wound. Elowen understood now. The curse wasn't powerful because the magic on those blades was powerful. It was powerful because Soren agreed with it. Somewhere beneath the king, beneath the alpha, beneath the tactical mind that had saved thousands by sacrificing dozens, there was a man who believed he deserved to lose everything: his sight, his wolf, his life. The curse was a lock. His guilt was the key that kept it shut. She knelt beside him. The chains hummed a warning, that same bone-deep vibration she'd felt before. But this time, she didn't step back. "You made an impossible choice," she said, "and people died because of it. That's real. I won't tell you it wasn't." Soren's head dropped. "But you didn't choose for those people to die. You chose to protect the most people you could with the information you had. That isn't cruelty. That's leadership. And it's awful. And it costs something, and you're allowed to grieve what it cost." The whispers from the chains rose sharper, louder. The faces contorted. The forest pressed closer. But you are not allowed to let it eat you alive, Elowen continued, her voice fierce now. This curse found your guilt and turned it into a cage, and every night you come here and you agree with it, you stop fighting. She took his face in her hands and turned him to look at her. His silver eyes were raw, stripped bare. I know what it feels like to believe you deserve the worst thing that happened to you, she said, and her voice cracked, but she kept going. I was left on temple steps as an infant, no name, no family. And I spent my entire life believing it was because something was wrong with me. I hid in the dark, Soren. I chose the Moonflower Gardens because I thought I didn't deserve to take up space in the daylight. Tears ran down her face. She didn't wipe them. But moonflowers don't hide from the light. They bloom in the dark because that's where they're meant to bloom. There's a difference. You told me that once. She paused. I told you that, and I think we both need to start believing it. The forest shuddered. The whispers faltered. You can grieve them, Elowen said softly, looking at the faces in the chains. You should grieve them. But grief is not the same as punishment, and you have to let yourself put this down, because if you don't, this curse will kill you, and it will kill me, and your wolf will die in chains in a place you built for it out of your own guilt. Soren stared at her. The silver eyes glistened. I don't know how to let it go, he said, and his voice was small in a way that had nothing to do with volume. You don't let it go, Elowen said. You let it change. From a cage, into something you carry. Grief you carry is heavy, but it doesn't kill you. Grief that owns you does. For a long moment, nothing happened. The forest held its breath. The chains hummed. Then Soren reached down and placed his hand on the wolf's flank, directly over the chains. I'm sorry, he said to the faces in the iron. I'm sorry I couldn't save you. I will carry that for the rest of my life. His voice broke, rebuilt, continued. But I won't die here. Not when there are people still alive who need me. Not when she needs me. The chains cracked. One link, then another, fractures spidering through the dark iron. The faces softened, the accusation fading into something that might have been release. The wolf surged upward with a strength that shouldn't have been possible. The remaining chains shattered like glass, dissolving before they hit the ground. The wolf threw back its head and howled, and the sound tore through the forest, shredding the pale trees, flooding the clearing with light that was warm and golden and fierce. Elowen grabbed Soren's hand. He grabbed hers, and the light swallowed them whole. They woke tangled together in his bed, gasping, shaking, alive. The bond between them blazed so brightly Elowen could feel it in her teeth, in her fingertips, in the spaces between her heartbeats. Soren was crying, silent tears that tracked down his face and caught the firelight. But he was smiling, the way dawn smiles at the horizon, slowly and then all at once. She wiped his tears with her thumb. He caught her hand and pressed his lips to her palm. I can feel him, he whispered. My wolf. He's here. He's whole. Elowen smiled back, fresh tears spilling. Welcome back. The curse didn't shatter cleanly. Soren's sight did not return. Some mornings he swore he could see light through the curtains, a brightness without shape. Other mornings, there was nothing. His hearing came back slowly, sounds filtering through like water seeping through cracked stone. By the second month, he could hear her voice again. By the third, he told her she talked too much. Elowen took that as a full recovery. His wolf, though, was strong. Stronger than before. The silver wolf that emerged during his first shift since the attack was enormous, vital, its fur gleaming. It had pressed its nose to Elowen's palm and exhaled a warm breath that smelled of pine and winter and something golden she couldn't name. Their mating was not without complications. A gardener as the alpha queen was not what the court had envisioned. The whispers followed her everywhere. She bore it the way she bore most things, quietly and with dirt under her fingernails. They'll adjust, Soren told her one evening, his arm around her waist as they walked through the palace gardens. And if they don't? Then they can take it up with their king, he said, pulling her closer, who is unreasonably, embarrassingly, and quite publicly devoted to his mate. The moonflower gardens bloomed again, not just recovered, but flourished, their fragrance carrying across the entire east wing on warm evenings. On the night of the autumn equinox, Elowin led Soren to the greenhouse and guided his hand to a vine where the largest moonflower she had ever cultivated was beginning to unfurl. "Describe it to me," he said. "It's white," she started. "But not plain white, silver at the edges, a faint blush of pale gold near the center, where the stamen—" "I can smell it," he interrupted softly, his nose brushing the petals. Then he turned toward her, and his ruined eyes found her face with that impossible accuracy that had nothing to do with sight. "I can smell it on you," he said. "I have always been able to smell it on you, even when I was too blind to know what it meant." Elowin smiled and leaned into him, and the moonflowers bloomed around them in the dark. And it was enough. It was everything.